It's game over for Palantir stock. We may have hit the point of no return with Palantir stock price in the best way possible. Just today, on some very important news that we're going to get into, Palantir is up 11% today with another almost 1% in the after hours. And this is after the stock being up already nearly 300% year to date and over 600% in the past 5 years. For anyone who's been in Palantir for multiple years now, congrats to you. It's been a great ride, and I think it's only going to get better from here, which is crazy to say. I'm excited to get into this video. If you're new here, I'm Austin. I'm a co-owner of cloudmusicsuite.com. I'm also a stock market investor, and as you've probably figured out already, I'm a Palantir shareholder. Now that it's run so much and given us over a 450% gain, the stock is now my number one stock in my entire portfolio in terms of dollar amount. Two things before we jump in. One, we're really close to that 5,000 subscriber mark, so help us out on reaching that goal by clicking the subscribe button. And then second thing, if you want to get some exclusive content and support the channel, consider checking out the Patreon with the link in the description. Appreciate you doing that. Let's jump into the video. So the big news today is all about Alex Karp and the management team being all in on playing Wall Street's games and doing what it takes to make Wall Street happy. So we got profits. We got profits for many quarters in a row that are growing like crazy. We got operating income growing like crazy many quarters in a row now. And we got the S&P 500 inclusion. And the accelerating revenue growth, the crazy net income growth, the crazy operating income growth, the massive Rule of 40 score being in the 60s, and that S&P 500 inclusion has really put some crazy wind behind Palantir's sales, and we've gotten insane gains this year, as we saw earlier. When Palantir was first a public company, Alex Karp, the CEO, didn't care at all what Wall Street's opinion was of Palantir, but they realized that it's going to help Palantir's sales in a roundabout way that I'm going to talk about later if Wall Street has a good view of Palantir. So they have started to play Wall Street's games over the past about 2.5 years now, and obviously it's paying off in a crazy way. So today's news is all about that next thing they're doing that's really playing Wall Street's games, and that thing is they're switching from being traded on the New York Stock Exchange to now being traded on the NASDAQ. As of November 26, 2024, less than 10 days from right now. And in Palantir's news release, they said, upon transferring, Palantir anticipates meeting the eligibility requirements of the NASDAQ 100 index. So they fully expect that over the next little while, they're going to be included into the NASDAQ 100. Let's talk about how likely that is. First, I want to check out the requirements of the NASDAQ 100 inclusion. First and most obvious, you must be solely listed on the NASDAQ. Palantir is going to meet that requirement on the 26th of November, 2024. They must be a non-financial company. Palantir is not a financial company, so they definitely meet that requirement. They must have a minimum average daily trading volume of 200,000 shares. Palantir definitely has that with a 10-day average of about 88 million shares trading hands. Companies must be public for at least 3 months before being included in the NASDAQ 100, and then the market capitalization must be within the top 100 companies that are listed on the NASDAQ. And Palantir will meet that requirement as well at nearly a $150 billion market cap on Palantir at this point. So they certainly meet all the requirements, which are not super stringent, but also I think one thing that's really going to work for them is that the NASDAQ 100 has the name of being a tech-heavy name. And there's a lot of companies that are in the NASDAQ 100 right now that are certainly not tech-heavy whatsoever at all. So I'm going to list a few companies that I could see Palantir potentially replacing over the next 4 quarters. I don't think this is going to happen like within weeks of being traded on the NASDAQ or anything like that. I think it'll take a little while, but I do see it being a possibility for Palantir over the next 4 quarters. Check out some of the absolutely not tech-heavy names that Palantir could potentially replace inside the NASDAQ 100. Honeywell, Cintas, Starbucks, CSX, which is a railroad, Marriott, Diamondback Energy, Old Dominion Freight, Fastenal, Ross Stores. I mean, come on now. Dr. Pepper Keurig, Kraft Heinz. Some of these stocks are just absolute snooze fests in comparison to a company like Palantir. If the NASDAQ 100 wants to keep the name of being the tech-forward index fund, they're going to have to make some decisions around dropping some of those more boring companies with way slower growth, with way less of a technology focus, way lower gross margins, just a weaker company all around than a company like Palantir will become over the next few years. But I think it's important to note that there's absolutely no guarantee that Palantir gets into the NASDAQ 100. It is totally up to the committee whether or not they want to drop one of those NASDAQ 100 stocks in order to replace Palantir. You can't just add Palantir to the index. Someone else has to be removed in order for Palantir to be added. Something important to remember. So is there any company on there they want to remove? I think I would remove a few in order to add Palantir, but I'm not the guy making the decisions for the NASDAQ 100 index, okay? So this definitely is positive for Palantir's sentiment, and sentiment can move a stock price in the short term. So most likely, this is going to be a very positive thing for Palantir's stock price. But what we care about as long-term shareholders, I'm personally going to be holding Palantir for at least the next decade, okay? So for someone like me, who's going to be in the stock for a very long time, I'm way more worried about the fundamentals of the company than I am around the short-term sentiment around the company. So is this NASDAQ 100 inclusion going to change the fundamentals in a major way from Palantir? No. I do think it'll do one thing in a roundabout way. It could affect the revenue. It will not directly affect the revenue, but let's not forget, Palantir is trying to become a B2B giant, a business-to-business giant. Their commercial revenue growth inside the US has been absolutely nuts over the last few quarters. And that total number of US commercial customers is only going to increase over time. They've got their boot camps going. They've got the artificial intelligence platform rolling and growing in a crazy way. And their sales team is obviously killing it based on the numbers they've been able to put up over the last 8 quarters. But whenever Palantir's name is more in the news, that's a good thing because Palantir's product is ridiculously expensive. The companies that are buying Palantir's product in order to make their company more efficient, they are probably publicly traded. There's very few companies that are using Palantir's services that are not publicly traded companies. So the more we hear about Palantir, if they're in the NASDAQ 100 index, they're in the S&P 500 index already, the more indexes they get included in, the more CNBC talks about them, the more executives hear about them and are going to consider Palantir's products. They're building a lot of trust with a lot of public companies. When one CEO hears another CEO talk about Palantir, and maybe the other CEO uses Palantir inside their business, they can share, hey, we've been able to save $80 million because of Palantir's products, and it only costs us $50 million. Yes, that's a lot of money. $50 million is a lot of money, but when your company is saving $80 million, you've got a $30 million net, and it's a no-brainer to use Palantir's products. The more and more Palantir's name is in the ears of big CEOs, the better it is for Palantir for them to ink those big deals with massive companies. So no, the NASDAQ 100 inclusion will not affect the revenue in a direct way. The S&P 500 inclusion did not affect the revenue in a direct way. It doesn't affect any of the fundamentals of the company in a direct way, but in an indirect way by getting Palantir more in the conversation of these big, massive companies that can be big long-term to build trust with Palantir and for a big company to consider using their products inside of their business. Palantir is very quickly becoming one of the most important companies in the entire stock market. Their market cap is near $150 billion now. That is nothing to sneeze at. It has obviously increased crazy over the last few months, but we're not talking about some tiny little company anymore when we talk about Palantir. We're talking about a massive growing beast whose products are becoming synonymous with AI efficiency. They've got one of the most insane moats around the company with their software being the best of the best. When you've got a ridiculous moat around a company, some of the best revenue growth in big tech, crazy earnings growth, best rule of 40 score that you can find out there of a public company, a bulletproof balance sheet, and a management team that is hell-bent on becoming the most important AI company in the entire world. That's how you get these crazy gains with Palantir. We're up ridiculously, 450+%. I think we're going to look back on that in 10 years and be like, wow, you remember that time we were only up 450% on Palantir? Now we're up, I don't know, I'm not going to put a number out there, but it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. I fully expect that I'm going to look back on Palantir and say this is a life-changing stock for me, just like I looked back at Tesla and said this was a life-changing stock for me. I can't wait for the next 10 years to play out with Palantir. The management team is doing all things on all sides to make sure that Palantir is viewed in a positive light while running the business better than it's ever been run in the past. Congrats to any fellow shareholders out there. If you were someone like me who was buying in the single digits with Palantir, you're sitting pretty on your shares. Even if you have a higher cost basis, you've still had an amazing amazing year. I'm looking forward to the rest of 2024 and, like I said, the next decade with Palantir stock. Let me know what you're doing with Palantir out there. Are you selling into the strength? Are you buying more still? Are you holding? What's your current plan with Palantir? I want to hear about it in the comments below. Definitely one of my favorite parts of posting here on YouTube is checking out your comments, having some conversation with you guys down there. I appreciate you being here in a major way. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day.